Nobody survives the death snow alone. The warning echoed through Ethan Walker's helmet as the storm alarm screamed across Outpost Kilo 9. Outside the reinforced windows, the world had vanished beneath a wall of white. Ice particles hammered the station hard enough to make the metal walls groan like an old ship sinking into the ocean. Ethan tightened the collar of his thermal jacket and stared at the flickering radar display glowing pale blue across the control room. Temperature outside, -78 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind speed, 82 miles per hour. Visibility, less than 6 feet. Perfect weather for staying inside and pretending the universe didn't exist. The heating vents rattled weakly above him, pushing out air that smelled faintly of burnt copper and machine oil. He reached for his coffee mug, only to realize the drink had gone cold an hour ago. Typical. Everything on Nevele's 7 froze eventually. Coffee, engines, people, especially people. Then the emergency beacon appeared. One sharp pulse across the radar. Then another. Ethan frowned. No way, he muttered. Nobody traveled outside during a death storm unless they were desperate or stupid. He leaned closer to the scanner. The signal was weak. Organic life signature. Humanoid. Roughly 700 yards northeast of the station. Half buried beneath moving snowdrifts. Ethan stared at it for several long seconds while the storm howled against the walls like something alive. His hand instinctively brushed the old silver ring hanging from a chain around his neck. 3 years ago, he had opened another distress beacon during another storm. 3 years ago, he had tried to save someone. The memory hit hard and fast. Frozen oxygen lines. A collapsing mining crawler. Emma's voice breaking apart through static before silence swallowed everything. Ethan closed his eyes. Not again. He turned away from the monitor and grabbed the maintenance tablet from the desk instead. Reactor levels needed balancing. The west solar array was still buried beneath 6 feet of ice. Plenty to keep him busy. Plenty to avoid thinking about the signal outside. Then the beacon pulsed again. Weaker this time. Almost gone. Ethan swore, quietly under his breath. Damn it. 5 minutes later, the outer airlock hissed open into absolute white chaos. Snow slammed into him instantly, sharp as shattered glass against his armored visor. The storm roared loud enough to drown out his own breathing. His boots sank nearly knee-deep into the ice as he forced himself forward 1 step at a time, guided only by the blinking locator on his wrist display. 600 yards. 500. 400. The cold clawed through every layer of insulated fabric like it wanted inside his bones. Then he saw her. At first, she looked like part of the snow itself. A pale blue shape half covered beneath drifting ice near the wreckage of an overturned transport sled. Ethan froze. Even through the storm, he could see the chains wrapped around her wrists. Broken restraints. Frost covering silver-white hair. Skin the color of frozen oceans. Alien. Her body barely moved beneath the snow. Ethan's jaw tightened behind the visor. Of course you are, he muttered bitterly. He should leave. The nearest alien territories were over 300 miles east. Whatever happened to her wasn't his problem. He'd spent years learning that lesson the hard way. But as he turned to walk back toward the station, a gust of wind shifted the snow covering her face. And her eyes opened. Bright gold. Terrified. Alive. They locked onto his through the storm like she already knew he was about to abandon her. Ethan stopped moving. The wind screamed around them. Somewhere in the distance, metal structures groaned beneath the weight of ice. The alien woman's lips parted slightly, trembling from the cold. No words came out. Just frost-covered breath fading into the storm. Ethan stared at her for 1 long second before letting out a tired curse. Yeah, he said quietly as he stepped toward her again. I'm gonna regret this. By the time Ethan dragged her through the outer airlock, his arms felt like solid ice. The storm doors slammed shut behind them with a deep metallic boom that shook the entire station. Warm air rushed across the chamber in uneven bursts from the emergency heaters, carrying the familiar scent of rust, dust, and overheated wiring. Ethan dropped the alien woman carefully onto the decontamination platform and pulled off his frost-covered gloves with stiff fingers. Do not die after I carried you all the way here, he muttered under his breath. Frost clung to her silver hair like powdered glass. Up close, she looked even stranger. Delicate lines shimmered faintly beneath her pale turquoise skin, glowing softly along her throat and wrists like fading light trapped beneath ice. The broken restraints hanging from her arms were unlike anything Ethan had seen before. Smooth white metal. No visible locks. No seams. Expensive. Military or noble tech. Neither option made him comfortable. The station scanner beeped overhead as it analyzed her condition. Severe hypothermia. Oxygen deprivation. Dehydration. Ethan exhaled slowly. Fantastic. He grabbed a thermal blanket from the emergency locker and wrapped it around her carefully. Even unconscious, she flinched the second his hand brushed her shoulder. Fear response. Deep-rooted. Automatic. Ethan noticed the bruised marks circling both wrists where the restraints had rubbed against her skin. Someone had kept her chained recently. He did not like where that thought wanted to go. The woman stirred weakly as he lifted her again and carried her deeper into the station. The hallway lights flickered above them in dull amber pulses while wind hammered against the reinforced walls outside. Every few seconds, the entire outpost groaned beneath the pressure of the storm. Ethan pushed open the door to the medical bay with his shoulder and laid her carefully onto the diagnostic bed. Steam rose faintly from her frozen clothes as the room heaters kicked higher. For a moment, he just stood there staring at her. Alien contact was not rare anymore. Traders, diplomats, cargo crews. He had seen plenty over the years. But this felt different. Too personal. Too isolated. Nevele's, 7 sat nearly 200 miles from the nearest shipping route. Nobody ended up here by accident. He moved toward the supply cabinet and started pulling out medical patches, warming injectors, and hydration packs. His hands worked automatically from years of emergency maintenance training. Keep the body warm. Raise core temperature slowly. Prevent shock. Focus on the next step. Never think too far ahead. The woman suddenly grabbed his wrist. Ethan nearly dropped the injector. Her golden eyes were open now, sharp, alert despite the exhaustion buried inside them. For several silent seconds, she simply stared at him, breathing unevenly beneath the thermal blanket. There was intelligence in those eyes. Calculation. Fear held tightly under control. "You are human," she whispered finally. Her voice sounded rough, almost brittle from the cold. Ethan carefully pulled his hand free. "Last time I checked." Her gaze shifted around the room rapidly, studying exits, cameras, ventilation shafts. Assessing threats. Trained. Definitely trained. "Why am I here?" she asked. Ethan injected the warming serum into the medical line beside her arm. Because freezing to death outside seemed rude. The alien woman blinked slowly, as if she did not understand the answer. Then her eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you want from me?" There it was. Not gratitude. Not relief. Suspicion. Ethan leaned back against the counter and crossed his arms. "Sleep would be nice. Peace and quiet too. But I am guessing that is not happening anymore." For the first time, something faintly human crossed her expression. Confusion mixed with exhaustion. The station lights dimmed briefly as another wave of wind smashed across the outer structure. Somewhere in the distance, warning sirens began humming low through the hallways. Ethan frowned and looked toward the ceiling. Power fluctuations. Again, he swore quietly under his breath and turned back toward the medical monitor. But when he looked up again, the alien woman was still staring at him with those glowing gold eyes. Not afraid this time. Searching, like she was trying to understand something far more dangerous than the storm outside. Kindness. The storm did not calm for the next 6 hours. It only changed shape. Sometimes the wind screamed across the station hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling panels. Other times it dropped into an eerie silence that felt somehow worse, like the entire frozen planet was holding its breath outside the walls. Ethan sat alone in the control room, nursing his third cup of reheated coffee, while warning lights blinked lazily across the reactor display. Power reserves were dropping faster than expected. Ice buildup on the exterior turbines again. He rubbed tired eyes and glanced toward the medical bay camera feed glowing in the corner monitor. The alien woman was awake now. She had not moved from the bed, had not slept either. She simply sat there wrapped in the thermal blanket, silver hair falling across one shoulder, while her glowing gold eyes studied every inch of the room around her. Watching, calculating, waiting. Ethan had seen that look before. Soldiers wore it after surviving something terrible. So did prisoners. He sighed quietly and stood from the chair with a groan in his knees. Might as well get this over with. The hallway lights flickered as he walked back toward the med bay carrying a tray with heated water packets and nutrient bars. The station heating system hummed weakly overhead, struggling against the endless cold pressing from outside. When the door slid open, the alien woman immediately straightened. Ethan noticed her hand instinctively move toward the broken restraint, still hanging from one wrist, like she expected another chain to follow. He stopped near the doorway instead of approaching closer. "Food," he said simply. "Not poison. I already checked." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You joke often for someone alone on a frozen world." Ethan placed the tray carefully on the counter beside her bed. "Talking to myself stopped being entertaining after year 2. For a second, the corner of her mouth almost moved. Almost. Then it vanished again beneath exhaustion and caution. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed loosely. "You got a name?" Silence stretched between them while snow rattled softly against the reinforced windows. Finally she answered. "Lasara." The name sounded smooth and musical, almost too elegant for a place like this. Ethan nodded once. "Ethan." Her gaze lingered on him carefully now, less defensive than before. "You live here alone, Ethan?" "Just me and several thousand pounds of failing machinery." He gestured toward the ceiling. "The machinery complains more." Another pause. Then Lasara reached slowly for the heated water pouch. Her movements were controlled despite the lingering weakness in her body. Graceful. Disciplined. Even now she carried herself like someone raised to never appear fragile. Ethan noticed faint geometric markings along the side of her neck glowing softly beneath the station lights. Not tattoos. Something biological. "Those marks?" he asked carefully. "Military." Her hand froze briefly around the water pouch. No short answer. Firm answer. End of conversation. Ethan recognized the boundary and let it go. Outside, another wave of wind slammed against the station hard enough to dim the lights for half a second. Lasara's eyes snapped upward instantly. Instinctive fear flashed across her face before she buried it again beneath composure. Ethan noticed anyway. "Relax," he said quietly. "The station looks worse than it is." She looked back at him. "You sound unconvinced." "That is because I have lived here long enough to know better." To his surprise, Lasara let out a faint breath that almost sounded like a laugh. Small, fragile, but real. Ethan stared for half a second before looking away first. Something about hearing that sound inside this cold, dead station felt strangely dangerous. The room fell quiet again except for the hum of failing heaters and distant storm sirens echoing through the halls. Then Lasara spoke softly without looking at him. "Why did you ask before touching me?" Ethan frowned slightly. "What?" "Outside. In the storm." Her fingers tightened subtly around the blanket. "You warned me before lifting me. Before removing the restraints. Before helping me stand." Ethan shrugged. Seemed polite. Lasara slowly raised her eyes toward him again, and this time the confusion in her expression looked deeper than before. "Among my people," she said carefully, "powerful beings do not ask permission from the weak." Ethan stared at her for a moment before giving a tired half-smile. "Yeah, humans are kind of stubborn about that stuff." Lasara looked at him like he had just said something impossible. The station lost main power at 2:13 in the morning. 1 second the hallway lights glowed their usual dull amber. The next, darkness swallowed everything except the red emergency strips blinking along the floor like slow heartbeats. The heating system died with a heavy mechanical thud that echoed through the walls. Then came silence. Real silence. The kind Ethan hated most. He sat upright instantly from the chair in the control room, pulse already racing before the backup systems even kicked in. Frost spread across the inside corners of the windows almost immediately. "Come on," he muttered, slamming his hand against the console. "Do not do this tonight." The reactor display flickered weakly. External turbine failure. Ice overload across the northern grid. Backup generators initializing. Estimated recovery time, unknown. Ethan rubbed a hand across his face and grabbed the heavy utility flashlight hanging beside the terminal. The metal handle felt freezing already. Without heat, the station would start dropping below survivable temperatures within an hour. Less if the storm intensified again. He moved quickly through the dark hallway toward the maintenance sector, boots echoing against steel floors while emergency alarms hummed low through the station. Halfway there, he stopped. The med bay door stood open. Ethan frowned instantly. "Lasara." No answer. His grip tightened on the flashlight as he stepped inside carefully. The room was empty. Thermal blanket discarded across the floor. Medical scanner still running. Then movement flickered near the far corner beside the frosted observation window. Lasara stood there silently wrapped in one of his old station jackets, staring out into the endless white storm beyond the glass. The red emergency lights painted soft shadows across her pale turquoise skin, while silver strands of hair drifted slightly from the cold air leaking through the vents. Ethan let out a slow breath he did not realize he had been holding. "You should not be standing," he said. "You nearly froze to death 6 hours ago." Lasara did not turn around immediately. Her glowing gold eyes remained fixed on the storm outside. "Your station sounds like it is dying." Ethan walked past her toward the wall panel and forced the emergency heater controls online manually. Weak warmth finally hissed through the vents. "Barely enough. It complains dramatically," he said. "Usually survives anyway." Lasara looked at him then. "You speak to machines as if they are alive." Ethan shrugged while pulling open another supply cabinet. "Out here, sometimes they are the closest thing to company." He tossed her a pair of insulated gloves from the locker. She caught them easily despite the lingering exhaustion in her movements. Fast reflexes again. Trained reflexes. Lasara studied the gloves for a moment before slipping them on slowly. Human gloves looked strangely oversized against her long, pale fingers. Ethan tried not to notice how absurdly normal the moment felt. Outside the station, the storm screamed across a frozen death world. Inside, an alien woman stood in his jacket wearing his gloves beside a failing heater. Somewhere along the way, reality had become very strange. "Stay here," he said while grabbing a repair kit from the cabinet. "I need to reset the backup relays before the pipes freeze." Lasara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Alone?" Ethan blinked once. "That is generally how being alone works." "You rescued an unknown alien during a death storm," she replied calmly. "Your survival instincts are questionable." Ethan stared at her for half a second before a tired laugh escaped him unexpectedly. Actual laughter. He could not remember the last time that happened inside this station. Lasara looked mildly surprised by the sound too. Ethan shook his head and turned toward the door. "Try not to steal anything while I am gone." "I considered it," she said quietly behind him. "But your coffee appears to be your only valuable possession." Ethan paused in the doorway and looked back at her. The faintest hint of amusement touched her expression now. Small, careful, like someone remembering how to smile after years without reason. For one strange moment, the cold inside the station did not feel quite as heavy anymore. Then the lights flickered again, harder this time. Somewhere deep below the floor, a loud metallic impact echoed through the outpost. Ethan's expression darkened. Instantly, that was not the storm. The sound came again 30 seconds later. A deep metallic groan somewhere beneath the station floor followed by a violent shudder that rattled the hallway walls hard enough to knock frost from the ceiling pipes. Ethan was already moving before the vibration fully stopped. "Reactor conduit," he muttered. "Please be the conduit." He grabbed the repair kit tighter and hurried down the emergency corridor while dim red lights flashed overhead in uneven pulses. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Fast ones. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. Lasara followed several feet back wrapped in his oversized station jacket, silver hair catching the emergency lights like strands of pale fire. "I told you to stay in the med bay. And I ignored you," she replied calmly. "You are welcome." Ethan would have argued if the station had not lurched again beneath them. The northern support grid flashed critical across the hallway monitor screens. Internal temperatures were dropping fast now, 48 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. They reached the lower maintenance sector just as another blast of freezing air hissed through the vents. Ethan swore under his breath. One of the pressure seals had cracked open near the turbine chamber. Ice crystals drifted through the hallway like frozen dust. "Stay behind me," he said automatically while forcing open the heavy maintenance hatch. The chamber beyond looked worse than he expected. Steam rolled from ruptured coolant pipes, while warning sirens echoed off steel walls coated in frost. One of the backup relays had blown apart under the overload, sending sparks across the floor in sharp blue flashes. Ethan immediately dropped beside the control panel and started working. Gloves off, tools out, replaced damaged couplings before the entire generator line froze solid. Lasara stood near the doorway, silently watching him for several seconds. Then, Without a word, she crossed the chamber and crouched beside the secondary relay system. Ethan looked up sharply. What are you doing? Helping. Do you even know how human systems work? Lasara brushed frost from the relay housing with careful fingers. Energy transfer. Systems are universal. Poor engineering is also universal. Ethan blinked once. That almost sounded insulting. It was. Despite everything, Ethan snorted quietly. Lasara examined the frozen relay line for only a few seconds before reaching toward the damaged connector. Faint gold light shimmered beneath the glowing patterns along her wrist. The broken relay suddenly sparked back to life with a low electrical hum. Ethan stared openly this time. Okay, he said slowly. That is definitely not standard engineering. Lasara's expression remained focused. Ethiri bioconductive resonance. Meaning your machines are old. Ethan shook his head with a tired smile and returned to reconnecting the coolant lines. Side by side, they worked in near silence while the storm battered the station above them. The only sounds were hissing steam, clicking tools, and the distant howl of wind through reinforced steel. At some point, the emergency lights stabilized from red back to soft amber. The heaters slowly rumbled online again. Warm air drifted through the chamber in uneven waves. Ethan leaned back against the wall with a long, exhausted breath. Well, he said, looks like we are not freezing to death tonight after all. Lasara sat quietly across from him beside the restored relay system. The station jacket nearly swallowed her smaller frame, sleeves hanging past her hands. For the first time since meeting her, she looked tired instead of guarded. Truly tired. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sealed nutrient bar, tossing it toward her gently. She caught it automatically. Peace offering, he said. Lasara turned the package over curiously. This is human food. Technically, that does not sound encouraging. Ethan smiled faintly. You get used to disappointment living out here. To his surprise, Lasara smiled back this time. Small, soft, real enough to change something in the room. Ethan looked away first, suddenly aware of how quiet the station had become around them. No alarms, no shaking walls. Just low humming machinery and warm air drifting through the chamber while snowstorms raged somewhere far outside. Lasara slowly opened the nutrient bar package. Then her expression changed. Completely. Her eyes widened slightly as she stared down at the silver wrapper in her hands. Ethan frowned immediately. What? She looked up at him carefully. This symbol. Ethan glanced at the wrapper. Standard Earth Supply logo stamped across the foil. Nothing unusual. Yeah. Lasara's glowing eyes locked onto his. Ethan, where did you get supplies marked with Royal Ethiri trade seals? Ethan looked down at the silver wrapper again, confused. The small symbol stamped into the corner barely looked noticeable at all. A thin circular crest surrounded by 3 curved lines. He had seen it hundreds of times on supply crates without thinking twice about it. It came with the station shipments, he said. Why? Lasara's expression had gone completely still. Not fear this time. Recognition. That crest belongs to the House of Valor, she said quietly. The ruling bloodline of the Ethiri. Ethan leaned back against the wall slowly. You are telling me your people put logos on emergency protein bars? It is not decoration. Her glowing eyes lowered toward the wrapper again. Only royal sanctioned vessels carry that seal. Ethan frowned. Well, unless royalty personally packed my monthly food supply, I think somebody in shipping got very emotional about branding. Lasara did not smile this time. Ethan. Something in her voice made him stop joking immediately. The heater vents hummed softly around them, while snow scraped across the station exterior like distant claws. Lasara sat perfectly motionless beneath the warm amber lights, silver hair falling across one shoulder as she stared at the royal seal in silence. Then she asked softly, How long have you lived on Nevles? 7? Almost 4 years. And before that? Ethan hesitated briefly. Mining operations. Deep survey maintenance. Nothing exciting. Lasara studied him carefully. You avoid speaking about your past. Ethan shrugged. Usually because people stop asking. Silence settled between them again. The station felt strangely smaller tonight. Smaller and warmer at the same time. Ethan hated that combination. It made things personal. He stood and crossed toward the coffee machine near the wall panel, mostly to give his hands something to do. The machine sputtered angrily while reheating stale coffee that smelled vaguely like burned dirt. Same as always. You want some? He asked. Lasara looked suspicious. Is it safe? Debatable. To his surprise, she stood slowly and walked over beside him. The oversized station jacket brushed softly against the floor with each step. Up close, Ethan noticed the faint glow beneath the markings on her throat had dimmed slightly since earlier. Whatever energy she used on the relay system had cost her something. He poured coffee into 2 dented metal mugs and handed one toward her carefully. Just like before, he waited for permission before touching her hand. Lasara noticed. Again, this time her eyes lingered on his face several seconds longer than usual. Humans always ask first, she said quietly. Ethan leaned against the counter beside her. Not always, but decent ones should. Lasara wrapped both hands around the warm mug without drinking. Steam curled softly between them in the dim maintenance chamber. Among the Etheiri, she said after a moment, power is proven through possession. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Sounds exhausting. It is. Her answer came so softly, he almost missed it. Ethan glanced sideways at her. For the first time since dragging her in from the storm, Lasara did not look dangerous or mysterious. Just tired. Deeply tired. Like someone who had spent too many years surviving inside rooms colder than this station. Then she spoke again. You carried me from the death snow. Ethan nodded cautiously. That tends to happen when people are freezing. Lasara's fingers tightened slightly around the metal mug. To my people, the death snow is sacred. Ethan blinked once. Okay. No Etheiri touches another within it unless they intend to claim responsibility for that life. Ethan stared at her. Claim responsibility? Lasara finally looked directly at him. Gold eyes glowing softly beneath the amber emergency lights. Completely serious. The one who carries you from the death snow becomes your protector before the stars themselves. Ethan opened his mouth. Closed. It again. Outside. The storm roared across the frozen planet hard enough to shake the walls. Inside the station, the silence between them suddenly felt far louder. Lasara, he said carefully, I literally found you buried in a snowbank. I know. And your culture somehow turned that into paperwork. For one dangerous second, Lasara actually laughed. Soft, breathless, beautiful enough to make Ethan immediately uncomfortable with how much he liked hearing it. But her expression faded again almost instantly. It is not paperwork, she whispered. It is older than law. Ethan's tired smile slowly disappeared, because the way she looked at him now no longer felt confused. It felt certain. The station sensors detected the incoming ship 30 minutes later. Ethan saw it first on the radar screen in the control room. A single bright signal cutting through the storm from orbit with impossible precision. Fast. Controlled. Military. His stomach tightened immediately. That cannot be good. Lasara stood behind him near the doorway, silent the second the signal appeared. Ethan glanced back at her and instantly knew. Her face had gone pale beneath the soft turquoise glow of her skin. You know that ship, he said quietly. Lasara did not answer right away. The radar display reflected in her golden eyes, while warning alarms hummed softly across the room. Outside, the storm still raged across Nivelles 7, but the vessel descending through it did not drift or shake once. Whoever piloted that thing feared neither weather nor terrain. Finally, Lasara spoke. Etheiri Royal Command. Ethan leaned back slowly in his chair. You have got to be kidding me. The ship continued descending on the monitor. Estimated arrival, 12 minutes. Ethan ran a hand through his hair and stared at the screen while old instincts started waking up inside him. Assess exits. Calculate fuel reserves. Count remaining supplies. Prepare for trouble before trouble arrived. He hated how natural it still felt after all these years. Tell me something honestly, he said without looking at her. Did you steal something important? No. Did you murder someone? Lasara blinked once. What? Just narrowing down possibilities here. No, Ethan sighed deeply. Great. Because royal military ships usually do not cross death storms for missing luggage. Silence filled the control room except for the low crackle of static across the communications panel. Then the incoming transmission alert flashed red. Ethan stared at it for 2 long seconds before pressing accept. The screen flickered alive, revealing a tall, armored figure standing inside a silver command bridge. Pale silver armor. White cloak. Glowing eyes nearly identical to Lasara's. The alien commander's expression remained perfectly calm. Human station operator, the figure said smoothly. This is Commander Valor of the Heir Royal Fleet. You are currently harboring escaped royal property. Ethan slowly looked over at Lysara. Her jaw tightened almost invisibly. Property. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. He looked back toward the screen. Funny, he said evenly. Because she looks like a person to me. The commander's expression did not change. Return her peacefully, and your station will receive full compensation for your cooperation. Ethan leaned back in his chair. And if I say no? A brief pause. Snow hissed softly against the reinforced windows behind him. Then this situation becomes unfortunate. Ethan hated diplomatic threats. They always sounded polite right before becoming disasters. He muted the transmission temporarily and turned toward Lysara fully. You want to explain what exactly is happening? For a moment she said nothing. Then she stepped closer into the dim control room light. I refused succession. Ethan frowned. Succession to what? The throne. The room went completely silent. Even the hum of machinery suddenly felt distant. Ethan stared at her for several seconds, waiting for some sign. She was joking. There was none. You are royalty, he said flatly. Yes. Actual royalty. Yes. Ethan rubbed both hands across his face slowly. I rescued a runaway alien princess during a death storm. Technically future empress. That somehow makes it worse. Despite the tension crushing the room, Lysara almost smiled again. Almost. But the sadness behind it hit Ethan harder. This time, I left because they would never allow change, she said quietly. The Heir survive through hierarchy, through ownership, through obedience. Her eyes lowered briefly. I could not become another voice protecting that system. Ethan looked at the frozen landscape beyond the station windows. Endless white storms beneath a dead black sky. Then he looked back at the radar countdown. 7 minutes until arrival. You know, he said tiredly, most people who crash into my life at least bring less political instability. Lysara's glowing eyes met his carefully. You can still surrender me. Ethan laughed softly at that. Not because it was funny. Because the suggestion somehow hurt more than expected. He stood from the console and walked toward the equipment locker beside the wall. After a moment, he pulled out the old pulse sidearm he had not touched in years. Then he crossed the room and held it out toward Lysara. Grip first. Her eyes widened slightly. Ethan, if this goes bad, he said quietly, I would rather you have a choice than chains. Lysara stared at the weapon in stunned silence. Then slowly, carefully, she accepted it with both hands like nobody had ever trusted her with freedom before. The royal ship landed outside the station 3 minutes later. Ethan felt the impact through the floor before he heard it. Heavy landing thrusters vibrated across the frozen ground, while snow exploded outward beyond the reinforced windows in massive white waves. The entire outpost groaned beneath the pressure. Ethan stood beside the control console, watching the dark silhouette settle into the storm like a blade descending from orbit. Smooth silver hull. No visible weapons. Somehow that made it worse. Beside him, Lysara still held the pulse sidearm carefully in both hands. Not like a soldier preparing for battle. Like someone carrying responsibility heavy enough to break them. You do not have to do this, she said quietly. Ethan kept his eyes on the ship outside. You already said that part. I mean it. Her voice softened further. If they discover you aided me willingly, your government may abandon this station entirely. Ethan let out a tired breath. Through his nose. Would not be the first time somebody in charge forgot I exist. Lysara stared at him silently. Ethan could feel it without turning around. The way she watched him now had changed again. Not suspicion. Not confusion. Something quieter. More dangerous. Respect. The outer communication system crackled suddenly overhead. Human operator. Commander Valor's calm voice echoed through the station. You have one final opportunity to cooperate peacefully. Ethan pressed the response switch without hesitation. You people really love dramatic speeches. This matter concerns the stability of an empire. Ethan glanced sideways toward Lysara. Her expression tightened faintly at the word empire. Funny thing about empires, Ethan replied evenly. They usually start calling people property right before everything falls apart. Silence answered him for 2 full seconds. Then the commander spoke again, colder this time. You know nothing about Heir survival. Ethan leaned against the console slowly. Maybe not. But I know what fear looks like. His eyes shifted briefly toward Lysara. And she looked terrified when I found her. No answer came after that. Only static. Outside, the storm continued screaming across the frozen plains while silver floodlights from the royal vessel cut through the snow like pale ghosts. Then the transmission disconnected completely. Ethan exhaled slowly and looked toward Lasara at last. Well, he muttered. Diplomacy is going great. To his surprise, Lasara smiled faintly despite everything. Small and tired and painfully real. You are reckless for a maintenance engineer. Occupational hazard. Another heavy silence settled between them, but this one felt different. Closer somehow. Warmer. Ethan hated how quickly he was getting used to her being here. The station no longer sounded empty. Then Lasara carefully placed the pulse sidearm down onto the control table between them. Ethan frowned immediately. What are you doing? Ending this. By surrendering? Her glowing eyes lifted toward him. By choosing. Before Ethan could respond, Lasara stepped toward the central communication console. Her silver hair caught the dim station lights while snowstorm reflections moved softly across her pale skin. She looked less like a fugitive now and more like exactly what she truly was. Royal. Ancient. Unreachable. The station microphone activated with a soft click. Commander Vaylor, she said calmly. This is Lasara Vaylor of House Vaylor. Outside, the storm seemed to quiet for one impossible second. Even Ethan stopped breathing. I relinquish my succession claim permanently, she continued. I reject the throne, the covenant, and all authority granted through bloodline inheritance. Ethan stared at her in shock. Lasara, her voice never shook once. The Etheiri cannot evolve through fear and ownership. If survival requires chains, then we were never truly strong. Silence flooded the station after her words ended. Long enough for Ethan to hear the low hum of heaters and the soft rattle of snow against steel walls. Then Commander Vaylor's voice returned quietly through the speakers. Different this time. Not angry. Almost saddened. You would abandon your birthright for a human? Lasara slowly turned toward Ethan. Golden eyes meeting his beneath the dim amber lights. Ethan suddenly realized she was trembling slightly. Not from fear. From honesty. No, she answered softly. I abandoned it because he treated me like I belonged to myself. The silence afterward hurt more than shouting ever could. Outside, the floodlights from the royal ship dimmed one by one. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, the massive vessel began lifting back into the storm. Ethan stared through the frozen window as it disappeared into the white sky without another word. Gone. Just like that. The station fell completely still. No alarms. No threats. Just warm air drifting quietly through old metal halls. Behind him, Lasara let out a shaky breath she had probably been holding for years. The storm finally began to die near sunrise. Ethan noticed it first through the silence. No more violent shaking through the station walls. No more screaming wind tearing across the frozen plains outside. Just a low, distant hum beneath the old metal structure as snow drifted softly against the windows in slow silver waves. The kind of quiet that only came after surviving something terrible. Ethan stood alone near the observation glass, holding a mug of burnt coffee that had gone cold again hours ago. Pale blue light from Nevele's Seven's frozen sunrise stretched across the horizon beyond the station, turning the endless snowfields into shimmering oceans of ice. For the first time in years, the planet looked almost peaceful. Behind him, soft footsteps crossed the hallway floor. Ethan did not turn around immediately. He already knew it was her. Lasara stopped beside him, near the window, wearing the same oversized station jacket, sleeves still too long over her hands. Her silver hair reflected the morning light softly now instead of the harsh emergency glow from the night before. The glowing markings beneath her skin had faded to a calm, steady shimmer. She looked healthier, stronger, but strangely quieter too. Neither of them spoke for a while. They simply stood there watching dawn slowly rise over a dead, frozen world neither of them had planned to survive together. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. So what happens now, Your Highness? Lasara glanced sideways at him instantly. Please do not call me that. Future Empress seemed too formal. To his surprise, she laughed softly again. That sound no longer startled him the way it had before. Somehow it already felt familiar. Dangerous thought. Ethan took another sip of terrible coffee and immediately regretted it. Lasara noticed his expression. That drink cannot possibly be safe for human consumption. At this point, it is mostly tradition. Her smile lingered faintly before fading into something more thoughtful. My people will not return, she said quietly. Once an heir renounces succession publicly, the covenant forbids pursuit. Ethan nodded slowly, meaning you are free. Lysara looked back toward the frozen horizon. I do not know what that means yet. Ethan understood that answer more than he wanted to admit. For years he had hidden himself on this station, pretending isolation was easier than grief. Pretending surviving counted as living. Then one impossible snowstorm had dropped a runaway alien royal into his dying outpost, and somehow forced warmth back into places he thought were gone forever. Funny how life worked sometimes. The station lights flickered gently overhead as full power finally restored across the grid. Warm air drifted through the vents, carrying the familiar smell of machinery and overheated circuits. Home. For the first time in a very long time, the word no longer sounded empty inside his head. Lysara suddenly stepped closer beside him. Careful. Deliberate. Ethan felt her hand lightly touch the sleeve of his jacket. Nothing dramatic. Just contact. Human and alien standing quietly beneath a frozen sunrise. Yet somehow the small gesture carried more meaning than entire conversations. Ethan, she said softly. Back in the storm, when you carried me from the death snow. He looked down at her hand resting against his arm. Yeah. Her golden eyes lifted toward his. Come now. Certain. I told you that among the Etheiri, the one who saves your life becomes your protector. Ethan nodded slowly. I remember. A faint smile touched her lips. That was only half of the tradition. Ethan raised an eyebrow. There is more. Lysara's glowing eyes softened in a way that made the cold station suddenly feel far too small. The protector is also never meant to face the stars alone again. Ethan stared at her for one quiet heartbeat, while pale morning light reflected across the snow outside. Then he looked away, first with a tired laugh under his breath. You know, he murmured, for somebody raised in a royal empire, you are really bad at subtle conversations. Lysara smiled fully this time, warm enough to melt years of silence inside that frozen station. Outside, the storm clouds finally broke apart above Nivelles 7, revealing clear skies filled with distant stars fading slowly into dawn. Ethan stood beside her, watching the lights spread across the ice while her hand remained gently against his sleeve. Neither of them moved away. And somewhere deep inside the old station, beneath the hum of restored machines and drifting warmth, something long frozen finally began to thaw.